Welcome everyone, Costin here with my race faction tier list in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. When I'm talking about factions in the context of this video, I'm obviously referring to the various races, though most people would take factions to mean the faction of a particular legendary lord and the effects they have on said faction. But yeah, in this context, faction basically interchangeable with race. Bit of a discussion about that. But anyway, where would I rank each individual race in the game at the moment? I've played every single one of them to a degree or another. I've done guides for them, I've done videos for them, ranking the best lords, the best factions, the worst factions, the best races, the worst races, all that. And I just want to make a tier list for every single race that's currently in the game. I've even purchased the Vampire Coast, which I didn't own previously, just for this video, because otherwise it would be incomplete. I hope you guys appreciate that, because it is a bit of an expensive piece of content. The race packs in general are some of the most expensive pieces of DLC in the game. So anyway, with that, let's get started. First faction I'm going to talk to, first race I'm going to talk about is Bretonnia. Where would I rank Bretonnia? B tier, a solid B tier. Bretonnia is a free DLC race. And they've always had problems because of that, because they've never been as complete as some of the other races, factions in the game. And on top of that, they do have a problem with their game plan. See, Bretonnia has really good control. They have a commandment, if you own a province, that gives them 10 control in a province. That is exceptional. I don't think any other race can compare to that, unless we're talking ones that use corruption and use high-level corruption to get something similar. But yeah, Bretonnia is pretty much second to none when it comes to that. And on top of that, of course, you do have buildings that give you more control, more public order. But having high control also means good growth. So Bretonnia can grow their settlements very quickly. So they're going to do very well when it comes to growing, when it comes to maintaining control of their settlements, and on top of that, they have a pretty good economy. Their baseline economic structures can generate a lot. Now, there is a bit of an issue with that, because in order to upgrade them, you need specific buildings, like a windmill, for instance, for the fields. And there are, of course, limitations because of the peasant economy, because you can only have so many peasants in your army. If you go over that cap, your economy takes a nosedive. There's a limitation with that. There are some restrictions, but if you stay within those restrictions, you will have one of the better economies in the entire game. There's, of course, also the chivalry system, which is kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, though not the way they made it in Immortal Empires. See, it used to be like you didn't want at all to engage in bad actions, but nowadays in Immortal Empires, because of the massive changes in chivalry, like you need a lot, that sacking settlements is actually worth doing in a lot of ways, which significantly benefits Bretonnia, because sacking settlements will give you a significant amount of gold. So you don't have to worry too much about losing chivalry, because you'll gain a lot through many sources. Of course, you wouldn't want to run on the campaign map with every single one of your lords having the quote-unquote negative trait that increases the amount of money gained from sacking settlements, but also costs you chivalry per turn. But you can certainly have a couple doing that and gain a lot of money and go up to 50% income from sacking settlements, which is quite a significant amount. But what are the problems of Bretonnia? Because everything I've said so far sounds good. Yeah, sure, you need to manage chivalry, but the problem is with their army. Bretonnia just doesn't have the best army in the game. Their knights, their high-end knights specifically, the Grail knights, are second to none. They're the best cavalry units in the game, but they are incredibly expensive. All their knight units are incredibly expensive, and they're hard to maintain. Knights errant can require 500 upkeep. Of course, you do get vows on your lords to reduce that significantly, but at the same time, just maintaining a full knight army is going to be a very hard thing to pull off. And even when you pull it off, there's always going to be limitations because of that, because cavalry armies just aren't that great within the context of Immortal Empires, where the vast majority of battles are minor settlement siege battles, and there's always going to be limitations with that. And the problem Bretonnia has is that they don't have the infantry units to support their cavalry. First off, they have limitations in how many infantry units they can recruit to the peasant economy, since the infantry are peasants. And on top of that, their archers, yeah, while they're cost effective, they're just pretty weak. They're not Skaven slaves, but they're not necessarily too far off either, especially with the ranged nerfs that Creative Assembly has introduced in Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Okay, so that's the first thing. Their infantry line, their battle pilgrims, foot squires, the men-at-arms just aren't that great. Leadership is an issue, combat effectiveness is an issue, so they're just not going to do very well on foot. They have decent artillery with field trebuchets or blessed field trebuchets, but you need a good foot line to support that. And you just don't have it, which creates a lot of issues in battles. And creates battles where you're having to micromanage a lot because a full-on cavalry army to charge, cycle charge, is going to require a great deal of micro. Bretonnia is in an okay spot, a pretty good spot, but they do have certainly issues with that. If you're playing a Bretonian faction, do expect to fight a lot of battles manually and do expect to micro intensely when it comes to that. It also feels like the auto resolve isn't necessarily too friendly towards you when you're playing as Bretonnia. I don't know why that is, but it just feels to me like that. Anyway, they're in an okay spot. They're just not the best. They're certainly not the worst. And you could play much worse factions than they are. They are better than quite a lot of factions that have a lot of paid DLC, even though they are a free DLC faction themselves. Moving on, the Beastmen. Where would I rate the Beastmen? Well, I would certainly put the Beastmen as, overall a C tier. Yes, C tier. I'm going to go with there. Sure, Tarax is incredibly powerful, and you can get a lot of things done as the Beastmen in the end game. The problem is the Beastmen have an incredibly weak early game, and the vast majority of the challenge currently in Warhammer 3 comes from the early game. It's not that you're necessarily going to lose a campaign very easily. You set up a Hearthstone, that's going to have a strong garrison. The AI doesn't like attacking strong garrisons, so they're generally going to avoid your Hearthstones. The problem is you have army limits, you have unit caps, and it takes quite a bit of time to overcome that, get more armies, get more unit caps. It probably takes 1 or 2 rituals on a Hearthstone, or 1 Hearthstone ritual or 2 Hearthstone rituals to be able to really get going. And by that point, you're already in the mid-game, and the difficulty goes down significantly by that point. So yeah, sure, you can get all your good units, heroes, multiple armies, and start rampaging across the map at that point, but many other factions have that. The Beastmen just take a while to get there. If you're obviously playing something like Tarax, he has a much easier time of doing this because he can go from battle to battle and get significant benefits from doing so. But the other Beastmen Legendary Lords, yeah, they're not really in a really good state. So yeah, I'm going to rate the Beastmen as a C tier. I think there's a reason why Beastmen factions, when you're not playing them, are just basically fodder for yourself, like just a way to earn experience and money. Because the Beastmen really need to increase those caps to be effective, and the AI just doesn't have a good way of doing so. Because to increase those caps, you need to do rituals. It's hard to pull it off. Even the legendary lords that the Beastmen have generally don't do it. Even Tarax himself, when he's being played by the AI. In fact, in Warhammer 2, he would routinely get wiped out pretty quickly on the campaign map. So Beastmen start weak. They do get strong later on, but doesn't really matter. I mean, they do have free recruitment. That is certainly a benefit, but the army limitations, the early game limitations, I feel are too severe right now to rank them any higher than this. But once you get going, you certainly do get going. Then moving on, Warriors of Chaos, S tier. S plus tier, I would say, if I could have that on the list. The Warriors of Chaos have certainly received a lot of love and attention in Immortal Empires. They needed it. They hadn't gotten an update since, the launch of Warhammer 1, except some regiments of renown, maybe some tweaks here and there, but no significant changes since then. And they felt it. They were the worst faction by far before the launch of Immortal Empires. Now they're the best faction by far. See, they get the same benefit as Beastmen in terms of having a couple of settlements that are very hard to take for the AI. So that's significant. Their legendary lords are some of the very best in the game. They have significant benefits to vassalization. They can vassalize much easier than any other faction in the game and get significant benefits while doing so. I mean, Nakai has a vassal he's associated with. So he is the exception to that, but by and large, the Warriors of Chaos do very well. On top of that, they get instant recruitment for pretty good units. And they do have a diverse army. Whereas most factions may stack their armies, early game armies, with 1 or 2 units, you can have 3, 4 plus unit types in your army, which gives you a great deal of versatility. And on top of that, you can upgrade your units through the Marauder Warband upgrade. Or if you're playing Be'lakor, you can take your demons and upgrade them as well. So they are in an incredibly good spot. They have good control for corruption. They have good armies. They have a good economy for the Dark Fortresses. They have really good support for the vassals, because the vassals will defend front lines, which you don't care about. Like, oh, I have a western flank. Well, I have a vassal there. He'll deal with that, or send him to deal with that while you're expanding in the east or the south or the north, wherever you are. But just ignore flanks you don't care about. Let your vassals deal with that. And it gets to a ridiculous point. You start out incredibly strong. You have some of the strongest starts, and you snowball completely out of control, regardless of the legendary lord that you are playing as the Warriors of Chaos. You have demonic units, strong artillery, some of the very best in the game, strong infantry, strong cavalry. You don't have ranged options all that much, but you don't need them. Like, of all the factions of the game, you absolutely do not need ranged. They do exceptionally well on siege battles and minor settlement battles. They do very well on the campaign map, and they are a rampaging horde that cannot be stopped. A note, the way the Warriors of Chaos play right now really suits Immortal Empires, because the AI likes to take minor settlements. They don't want to go after the big ones. The fact that the Warriors of Chaos don't have to deal with that and leave their vassals to deal with that, and their vassals will do a pretty decent job at it, gives them a significant advantage. So overall, really great race, really great faction, and Creative Assembly has done an amazing job with their rework, and I think that they're going to serve as a template. At least their unit upgrade system is going to serve as a template for other factions going forward, for DLC packs, or for future games in Total War. Moving on, Cathay. Where would I place Cathay? Well, I think Cathay is certainly going to be either an A or B tier. It's hard to say. It's hard for me to really be decisive about this. There are reasons why I want to put them A tier. There's reasons why I want to put them B tier. But I think I'm going to go B tier. The reason I'm going B tier is that although Cathay has good economy, they have caravans which can generate them a significant amount of income. If they manage the harmony system well, they get significant faction benefits to public order, growth, etc. They have a lot of things to like. There is one major downside. They really need some DLC to flesh out their roster even more, and in particular they need heroes that give them casualty replenishment, which is going, because without that you're going to limit your expansion, because you're going to need to stop to replenish your units. So Cathay has a good economy, have good units, have a solid, balanced, good roster, gain a lot of things to like. The harmony system can be an annoyance to deal with in a campaign, but you can manage it. That's not too big of an issue. Just an annoyance, not the major problem. But I do feel that there are gaps in their rosters. I mean, you can't do wrong with Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen moving on to Celestial Guard with some artillery moving on, or added to that in Terracotta Sentinels. But it just kind of feels a bit lackluster. It's strong, it's good, it gets the job done, but in some ways feels lackluster. Like, I'd be curious to see how Cathay would handle themselves in some of the most difficult starting positions, like Kislev, Nagaron, all that. But I guess one of the biggest advantages Cathay does have is that their starting positions are pretty damn safe. Even Miao Ying, who has the Great Bastion and has cast factions to deal with, she's not going to have a hard time with it. So it's relatively easy to play as either of the two legendary lords of Cathay. But yeah, in some ways I just feel they're lacking. They don't have any major issues, but they don't have anything exceptional, I suppose, with them. Except, yeah, if you get full harmony, you do get some exceptional buffs. But army-wise, they just don't feel exceptional. The dragon heroes, yeah, dragons are good, but they're only legendary lords. Again, I mean, if you had minor dragons as heroes, really as heroes or as lords, not just dragon spawn, that would be a bit more interesting. But I do feel Cathay is in a good spot. They just need more to make them an A rating race on this list. Moving on, the Demons of Chaos. And when I mean Demons of Chaos, I mean all of them. Not just the Demon Prince, but Nurgle, Slaanesh, Khorne, Tzeentch. Where would I place them? You know where I'm going to put them. F tier. Actually, I put them even lower than that. They're all awful. For different reasons, but they're all absolutely freaking awful. See, let me explain how it is. The Demons of Chaos should be a powerhouse. It should be powerhouse as a race. All of them should be. And in some ways they are. Like, Kairos has some of the best spell casting in the entire game, and control his enemies, can take settlements through a campaign mechanic without being at war with the faction. In fact, I don't think you can take it if you're at war with the faction. There's quite a lot of options there. Skarbrand can go from battle to battle, raising endless armies across the campaign map, unable to be stopped. Nurgle has his plagues, of course, and Sinnelleos has cultists and forced vassalization. The problem is that every single demonic faction is based on a gimmick like that, be it the blood hosts, the changer of ways, the plagues, or the cults. And that's the issue, because baseline Demons of Chaos are garbage. Their economy is awful, their control is not necessarily that good, and they're going to struggle maintaining more than one army. And that army, yeah, it's demons. You might think it's incredibly powerful. It's not. That's the problem. Many other armies can beat them to it. Take an Akari, for instance. If you fight as an Akari, you're dealing with a lot of elves who will absolutely demolish you in a fight. And you need to be very careful. And you will have swarms of elves coming down on you. If you're playing on a high difficulty especially, it's a problem, because generally there you will see like one full stack, at least 2 stacks being the norm, and you're struggling to even maintain a stack of troops to fight the enemy. Like, if you're playing Demons of Chaos, you're gonna have a lot more fun on a lower difficulty. And even Skarbrand, who does have a lot of power, genuinely has a good army with the Bloodletters, that is more of a really good mid-game army than an early-game army. Even Skarbrand has significant issues with his economy, significant issues with managing his provinces, significant issues with maintaining more than one force outside of the Blood Hosts, which are temporary armies anyway. So all of them have issues. They're leaning too heavily on the gimmicks, too little on good economy, growth control, what have you. And therein lies the issue for all of them. Once you get growing across the campaign map, yeah, sure, they'll be in a good spot, but the early game is pretty harsh and pretty awful, honestly. You're probably going to end up having to fight a lot of battles as all of them, and many of those battles you're not fighting because there's a genuine challenge. You're fighting because, yeah, your replenishment is not the best. And you don't want to take casualties, especially true as Skarbrand. You can enjoy Skarbrand a great deal if you're playing him, but only if you enjoy fighting a lot of those minor inconsequential battles, just so you don't take needless casualties. So yeah, the Demons of Chaos, every single one of them, the Undivided and the Monogod factions, they're all awful at the moment, from my perspective. I know a lot of people enjoy Skarbrand. I wish I could, but it's just a gimmick. Like, all of them are gimmick campaigns. The Demon Prince is in the worst spot because his special faction mechanic is body parts. Oh, great. No powerful armies, although he does flexibility. You know what the worst part is about the Demons of Chaos? They added a bunch of them dedicated marauders to them, but those are paid DLC units from the Champions of Chaos DLC. But if you own the Champions of Chaos, why in the hell would you play any of the Monogod factions or the Demon Prince when you can play much better Legendary Lords of the Warriors of Chaos, which will have much better campaigns in general, because they get all the demonic units, pretty much, and have all the Norskan units, all the Warrior of Chaos units, rather, have a substantially better upgrade. Like, there's a night and day difference between Warriors of Chaos and the Demons of Chaos. The Demons are laughable. The Warriors of Chaos are top dog currently in the game. Moving on, the Dark Elves. Where to place the Dark Elves? Well, I think the Dark Elves is a bit of a tricky one. They've got benefits, they've got cons, but I think they do deserve an A tier. The reason is they have a really good early game army. Let's just go with that. First off, they have good Legendary Lords. A lot of them are pretty good. Some of the most dangerous in the game, like Malice, Darkblade, Malekith, Morathi. Yeah, they're pretty damn crazy. You dread fighting their Legendary Lords in a battle. There's a reason why in Warhammer 2 Morathi would conquer half of Ulthuan, and she would generally invade Ulthuan with full force. Malekith was always a bit of a joke, though he is quite strong right now. He's in a pretty good spot. And Malice Darkblade, literally the guy invaded the Chaos Wastes and decimates everyone around them. But what makes the Dark Elves so good? So it's their lords, their armies. Dark Shards, Shades, powerful units all around, powerful infantry, powerful ranged units, decent artillery, not the best in the game, but decent enough artillery, decent monsters all around. And I would say what elevates the Dark Elves, although certainly not as overpowered as it used to be, is their economy is in a pretty decent state, though you are reliant on slaves. And slaves are nowhere near as good as they were in Warhammer 2, that's absolutely true, but they're still pretty decent, even though the caps are there's some heavy caps, and you do have costs to maintain certain buildings, but their economy is in an overall good state. The one reason I would say that the Dark Elves deserve an A-tier spot is the Black Arcs. Black Arcs give you incredible potential across the campaign map. Lots of power if you're fighting near the coasts, lots of unit recruitment, a lot of benefits, hard to take down, etc., etc., etc. Without Black Arcs, they would be a B tier all the same, but with Black Arcs, they are in an incredibly powerful state when it comes to recruitment across the map, coastline power, especially. You are vulnerable to pirates, of course, but there's a lot of benefits when it comes to recruitment and units and battle benefits if you are playing the Dark Elves. And they are pretty scary to face in a battle, all the same. Like, all the armor piercing that their units do have, a lot of their units do have, make them pretty crazy to deal with. Moving on, the Dwarves. The Dwarves, I've talked about them in many videos so far. Where would I rate them? It kind of feels painful to do it, but they're an F tier faction at the moment. Before you throw the grudge meter at me, I'm just gonna say this. The Dwarves, army-wise, they're okay. They can get Quarrelers, which certainly would compete, if not beat, the Dark Elves in terms of early game army potential. Late game, they have some of the best, if not the best, artillery in the entire game. They have really powerful, durable units. However, they don't have the cavalry to do launch flanking attacks, but ranged doom stacks do work very well for the Dwarves. And with the melee changes, their melee armies have also become a lot more viable. However, despite that, and in spite of the fact that their Rune Masters and Rune Lords will decimate entire armies with their abilities, in spite of all of that, the Dwarven economy, Dwarven control, the grudge meter, and the growth are utter trash at the moment. The grudge meter is especially broken. It's very easy to get high intensity grudges with the starting ones within like 10-20 turns. The grudge meter will be full as any of the Dwarven legendary lords you're playing except Grombrindal, and that makes your campaign awful. People say, oh, Slayers, you can get Slayers. Slayers are garbage. Quite plain and simple. Because they cost a lot to recruit, and they're not the best units. You don't care about using Slayers unless you're playing Karakadrin. Absolutely. Like, if you're playing as Ungrim, sure, you have reasons to use Slayers, but if you're playing anyone else, no. The range stack is better. The Dwarf Warrior stack is better early on. And later on, Artillery, Thunderers, all that, they will make for a much better army. Slayers are just too vulnerable to ranged, and they're not so exceptional in melee that they're worth getting. Just getting a bunch of Slayers that you don't even get for free. You have to pay a lot of money to recruit them. Just getting them for global recruitment in a pool when you have full grudges does not make the grudge meter good. And you lose a lot of control, research, and diplomatic relations with fellow dwarves. Their growth is terrible by default. It's especially bad on a high difficulty level because it means you're going to be stuck in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 for a very long time, even with the structures and commandments and research for growth. It is that bad. Other factions that may struggle in terms of like their buildings may have the benefit of a lot of income from sacking settlements, right? But you don't get that benefit as dwarves. The only thing the dwarves really have going besides Quarreler and Dwarf Warrior Doom stacks early on, they do also get Grudge Throwers pretty quickly. You can get those at fairly early tier. You can get artillery much faster than anyone else, which is a nice benefit. But the only benefit that the dwarves have is an exploit with Oath Gold, where they can craft powerful items and keep doing that again and again and again. And that is good, but it's not enough to make up for all the deficiencies the dwarves have, because poor public order means poor growth. Poor growth, and the dwarves have that by default, even if they had good public order. Poor growth means you're not able to get your settlements to a high level. If you're not able to get the settlements to a high level, you can't improve your economy. So the dwarves have all of those problems. You can't get heroes, you can't get access to a lot of the higher end stuff. If the dwarves had access to the higher end stuff much easier, they would be a really good race, but right now they're just absolutely garbage. Playing a dwarven campaign, I've tried one. I've tried playing multiple ones. I've tried playing as Belgar, I've tried playing as Forik, I've tried playing as Grombrindal, they're just miserable experiences, honestly. Because your settlements are just going to be weak. And I don't think that's really what suits the dwarves. I understand that people say that, oh, the dwarves should be a slower race. That makes sense, but in the lore, the dwarves may be limited in terms of like how much territory they take. But one of the points that's made is that dwarven holds are nearly impregnable. Except that in the game they're not. I think what the dwarves would really benefit from is more of a system like the Dark Fortress system that the Warriors of Chaos have, where they have a select few settlements that are really, really good and can grow quick and can benefit from that, and minor settlements are not worth all that much. That would fit them. Or hell, even the Wood Elves have something similar to that. But what they currently have is not great. And the dwarves really do suffer from the fact that they only got one DLC for them, one single DLC, the Belegar one, and they did get a rework with the addition of Forik, but it certainly wasn't good enough. In fact, many of the issues that we currently have were because of the quote-unquote rework that we did get with Forik. Free DLC, sure, but they need to do a much better job than they've been doing so far with the dwarves. They've certainly fallen behind. You can also see this in campaign after campaign, where AI play dwarves will do terribly against many other factions. It's not just the Greenskins, many other factions. Okay, moving on. The Empire. Where is the Empire? Am I going to put them as an F tier as well? No. For all the issues the Empire has, for all the issues with the Imperial system, for all the problems the Empire has in terms of the fact that the power of the Empire lies in their mid to late game, where the campaigns are already irrelevant and their early game is especially weak. In particular, if you don't have the Beast and the Hunter DLC, so you don't get access to archers. The Empire, from my perspective, is a D-tier faction. Because they do have good growth, they do have a good economy, they do have access to really powerful stuff that is accessible, that isn't a grind to get to. The Empire has many issues in individual campaigns, absolutely, but as a faction, they're in a pretty decent spot. If they had access to stuff earlier, they would be amazing, but they're not. They are kind of like the jacks of all trades. They have good artillery, ranged units, cavalry, etc., heroes, magic. But right now, their campaigns are a misery. Volkmar, Gelt, Karl Franz, Wolfhard, they all have major problems in their campaigns. They desperately need a rework. But even despite that, like if you can get past the early game as the Empire, you'll be in a good spot. You can't say that about the Demons of Chaos or the Dwarves. You can say it about the Empire. So yeah, they're in a pretty decent spot. Do think the Imperial system needs major reworks. Wolfhard's campaign needs a major rework, and Volkmar could really benefit from, I know, starting with a level 3 settlement, for instance, or at least level 2 with Sindenberg. He would really benefit from that, but as it is, they all suffer from their campaign situations at the moment. The Empire is in a decent spot. They do need a rework, however. Greenskins. Greenskins are... well, it's a hard one. I'm tempted to put them S tier because they've got a lot to offer, but they would probably be more like A+. They're not on the same level as the Dark Elves. They're above the Dark Elves, so I'll just put them higher on this list than the Dark Elves. But yeah, I'd consider them an A+. You know all the problems I mentioned, the Dwarves, the poor growth control, etc.? The Greenskins don't have any of those issues. They have amazing growth, amazing control, amazing economy. Not only do their economic buildings generate a lot of money, but they generate absurd amounts of money from sacking, looting settlements. That's already a big beginning because it means you can start very quickly as Greenskin, just start swarming the map and getting lots and lots of armies that you recruit. Then there's the WA mechanic, where you declare a WA against the target. By the way, filling up that WA meter gives you significant faction-wide benefits, control, growth, etc. But you declare a WA against the faction, every single army that you have, every single stack, and you'll probably be having a lot of stacks very quickly, will double in size. You're not taking 20 guys to a battle, 20 units to a battle. You're taking 40 units to a battle with each single army. That is incredible power that gives you significant advantages in auto-resolve, or if you're fighting the battles manually. It just means you'll steamroll the map as every single Greenskin Legendary Lord. In particular, if you're playing as Grom the Punch, if you have that DLC, but Greenskins are in a great spot even without any of the DLC packs. You can play the Greenskins without any DLC and you'll still be in an amazing spot. If you play them the DLC, you'll steamroll the map as everyone except Skarsnik. Skarsnik has issues with his focus on goblins, unable to recruit orcs, etc., starting position. But if you're playing as anyone else, you'll be in an amazing position. If you're playing as Grom the Punch, you can easily start a campaign, declare war on the entire world, and win. With ease. Not win, but with ease. Without effort, without care. You're just going to steamroll every single person around you. There are some legendary lords that start near Lorem, for instance, the Wood Elven homeland. Grom is the only one who gives no shits about the fact he starts next to all of the main Wood Elven factions. He absolutely decimates them in battle. He decimates them on a campaign map. He's so good that even though he starts in Bretonnia, where the climate isn't favorable to him, he still doesn't care. He's expanding an unfavorable climate and doing so at such an incredible rate that the Greenskins just in general put everyone else to shame. The reason is their tier 1 economic building generates a lot of money. Their tier 1 growth building generates a lot of growth and casualty replenishment. And at tier 2, they get some of the best control buildings in the entire game. Beyond all the benefits of commandments, research, WA in terms of control and growth. Yeah, the Greenskins are amazing. And you can also customize each unit with scrap. And of course, there's Grom's Cauldron if you own that DLC. So I am tempted to put like Grom would be S tier, by the way, on this list. But I do think for all that, the Warriors of Chaos are just in such a ridiculous state because of their vassal. Like, the vassals are what put the Warriors of Chaos over the edge when it comes to the Greenskins. If you were to eliminate vassals, yeah, the Greenskins might be better. Then there are the High Elves. The High Elves of Wolf 1. Where do they sit? Well, I think the High Elves, like their Dark Elven cousins, are also A tier. They're nowhere near the level of the Orcs. But every single High Elven settlement will allow them to recruit some of the best early game units available, which are Spearmen and Archers. Archers without armor, the light armor variant comes from barracks, but even Archers without armor are still really, really good units. They're not Glade Guard of the Wood Elves, but they are really cost effective, and you can mass them in large numbers, and you can also get really good line holders to protect those Archers with the Spearmen. They have a good roster. They don't have the best artillery, but outside of that, they're in a pretty good spot. They have some of the best range units in the game. Good monsters with dragons and phoenixes. Pretty decent cavalry available as well. Not the best in any department, I would say, but really jack of all trades. Not the same artillery power as the Empire, but still in a pretty good spot all the same. Then we get to Kislev. And Kislev gets a D-, I feel. I don't think they're in an F tier, but they're certainly not in a great spot either. What is the problem with Kislev? Well, the problem with Kislev is that although late game with Warbears, Ice Guards, etc., they can be in a really good spot, early game, having only the ability of using Kossars and requiring a tier 2 building to get armored Kossars does certainly limit their effectiveness by quite a significant amount. Kossars are okay, but they're not exceptional. And Kislev doesn't have the best economy in the game. Their settlements are pathetic in Kislev itself on the campaign map. Outside of the 3 big cities, which are Kislev, Ehrengrad, and Prague, their provinces, the oblasts and Troll Country, are just filled with minor settlements, and they're not going to generate you a significant amount of money. They're limited in what you'll be able to get out of them. And although Kislev can certainly scale very well on the campaign map, they're also facing some of the worst starting situations of any race on the campaign map, unless you're playing Boris, but that is exception, not the rule. Catherine and Kostaltin have some of the most difficult campaigns in the entire game, and that is obviously going to limit their growth. They can be in a decent spot. They were designed to be as a new player-friendly race, but believe it or not, I think some of the design decisions Creative Assembly made with Kislev initially have backfired now with the release of Immortal Empires. But why do I say that? Well, Immortal Empires buff melee, nerfed ranged. All of the Kislev early game units are more focused on ranged than melee, though armor Kossars can certainly do pretty well in melee, but even they are more of a ranged option in a lot of ways. The problem with that is when you nerf ranged units like Kossars, which were already not great, they're just going to end up suffering a significant amount. And that's exactly what's happened. Kislev has amazing replenishment for Patriarchs. They have some really good heroes with Patriarchs and Ice Mages, but they do certainly have limitations, and they have incredibly harsh campaign starts. And even Boris, who is a powerhouse and can steamroll the early game, he does start with nothing, so you have to build everything from scratch. So there are issues all around when you are playing a Kislev campaign. Incredibly harsh starts, incredibly difficult campaigns, and although you do have a lot of late game power, absolutely, that can be said for many other factions. Getting there is a journey, a nightmarish journey that is not going to be easy to make. Now, moving on, we have the Lizardmen. The Lizardmen, I've never been too big of a fan of them, I feel, but they're in an okay spot. They're not in an exceptional spot, but I would certainly rate them as B tier. The Lizardmen, dinosaurs riding dinosaurs, yeah, that's fun. I think they're not so interesting to play, not because of the gameplay style. You just don't get attached to them from a story perspective, and for me personally, that matters. But yeah, I think the Lizardmen are an okay spot. They're just not super amazing either, though. I mean, there's the Saurus, the Skinks, Oxyotl. They're okay. They have some really powerful magic, and yeah, you can steamroll the campaign if you're playing something like Gorok, right? You can do a lot of things with some of the Lizardmen Legendary Lords. You can have one of the best campaigns if you're playing as Oxyotl, but I think they're just kind of dull overall as a race. They don't have anything exceptional. Like, it's exceptional to unleash a horde of hell cannons and dragon ogres as the warriors of chaos, or declare war on a faction and see your dozen or so vassals swarm the enemy. Lizardmen are okay. I think the problem is their lack of ranged in particular. They're more of a melee-focused faction. I mean, they have range, don't get me wrong on this, but they're more of a melee-focused faction, and they're not particularly interesting in melee either, to be honest, unless, yeah, you're unleashing the Dino Doom stack. The problem is the economy you have is not necessarily going to be able to support that in very large numbers. You can get one full stack of Saurus decently well, but even maintaining that can be a bit of an issue. A bit slower start, but relatively safe, I'd say. The Lizardmen do benefit from the fact that their legendary lords, by and large, are in pretty good starting positions. That is certainly a benefit, but they're just not in an exceptional spot. I couldn't give them more than B tier. Like, compared to the swarm of Greenskins or the ranged doom stacks of the Dark Elves and High Elves, yeah, giving them a higher number on this list would be a disservice to the other races that deserve it more. Then there's Norska. Where would I rate Norska? Absolutely an A tier race. Absolutely so. Their early game armies are powerful. They benefit a lot. The two legendary lords, be it Trog or Wolfric, benefit a lot from the fact that if you kill the leader of another Norskan faction, you confederate with them. We can confederate them. So they can unite all of Norska very quickly. They have a great economy. Their ports are laughably powerful. They have some of the best ports in the game. And their ports are much, much better than the unique ports that you can find. Or they're on par with the unique ports like Avanagram, Marienburg, etc. So they have a powerful economy. They have a powerful confederation mechanic. They have a pretty good army roster. Bit weak on range, no artillery, all that. But mammoths, trolls, Fimnir, etc. Pretty good. There's a reason why Trog, for instance, ends up being a major dominant threat for Kislev, for instance. Fighting Marauder Berserkers early game, which they can have access to very easily, is a nightmare. And they're actually quite capable of giving the Warriors of Chaos a run for their money early game in terms of fights. And they're vassals to the Warriors of Chaos. For a lot of Warriors of Chaos, they become vassals. They're pretty deadly when they're facing, when they're played by the AI against the other AI. I haven't seen a single campaign so far on Legendary where Norska ever is under genuine threat of being taken out. I have seen plenty of campaigns where Norska does decimate their enemies, goes deep into the Empire. That says a lot about the faction's power from my personal perspective. It's in a pretty good state. They can get a lot of power. They have monster hunts. They have powerful monsters, powerful infantry. Lacking on range, absolutely, but they have pretty good melee to more than make up for it. So yeah, in a pretty good spot. Sieges can be an issue, right, on the defensive, but the campaigns of Warhammer 3 right now really favor, by and large, the aggressor. Then we have the Ogres, the Day 1 DLC pack for Warhammer free. They're a C rating. They have good early game armies, though weak on armor piercing, which is always going to be an issue. And they've got large units, which in itself is always going to be an issue, especially when dealing with masses of spearmen. They do have incredibly powerful charges and can get a lot of money from sacking settlements. The problem with the Ogres isn't their army roster, though it is lacking in certain ways. You don't have the economy to support more than Ogre Bulls, though, by and large. Unless you're thinking about Greases supporting Iron Guts, sure, that is the exception, though. But by and large, the Ogres do struggle with their economy because all the settlements that they have outside of Ogre camps are minor settlements, so they're not going to be able to support heroes, top-end units. And the amount of gold you get from those is pitiful. What about the Ogre camps? Well, the Ogre camps are really good from an economics perspective, but they're very, very vulnerable. You can't move a lord in a camp, so if you're fighting a camp battle, it's going to just be led by a random dude who has none of the lord benefits, none of the benefits in battle for units, which is going to be a major problem for you when you're on the defensive. The Ogres do okay on the offensive, they do incredibly poorly on the defensive, and the issue is they don't have enough camps to expand across the map when you're playing something like Immortal Empires. In the base game, they are incredible. In the Immortal Empires, they're just lackluster. And I always felt there were issues with their game plan because, yeah, spamming Ogre Bulls works, but Ogre Bulls take forever to kill armored units, which is a problem in its own right. They do pretty well. They have decent magic, but yeah, they do struggle to expand across the map, and they do struggle in getting to the end game. Have a pretty decent early game, especially if you're playing as Greases and you take out a number of Cathay and caravans. But yeah, the minor settlement aspect really kills it for me, and I think the very limited number of camps also has a major impact. I think if you could get double the amount of camps that you can right now, if you started with being able to get one and get two pretty quickly, that would be nice, and go from 2 to 4, 4 to 6 or 8, and just go from there. If they could double the amount of camps or get to up to, I don't know, 20, 30, something like that, total in a campaign, I think the Ogres would be a much better state, and also would help if you can move your Lord into a camp to hold it from a defensive standpoint. If they could do that, they would be in a much better state, but as it is right now, they do have issues with their economy, with growing their empire, with expanding across the map. They do very well early on in the first few turns, but after that, they do start dropping off significantly, whereas most other factions do get significantly better as you play them. The Ogres get worse as you play them, and that's a major issue. Then there's the Skaven. The Skaven, I would certainly say they're a B tier. Powerful armies, absolutely. Weapon teams as Claw, bloody nuclear weapons as Claw, monstrous units as Fraught, being able to eliminate entire factions if you're playing a Snitch by killing their leader and plunging them into anarchy. The Skaven do have some really powerful mechanics. Here's the issue, though. The Skaven are a grower race, so they're a race that gets more powerful as you play them. The problem is their early game for every single one of their legendary lords can be an excruciating experience because you only have access, you will only be able to really rely on clan rats and Skaven slaves until you start getting the free units as Fraught or the weapon teams as Claw, but you're already talking 5, 6, 7 turns in that you're wasting as pretty much each of their campaigns. So they have a very slow start, but they do get very strong after that. At the same time, they never will have this sheer potential as some other factions do, from my perspective. Yeah, weapon teams seem great until you realize that half the time they can't shoot because the terrain won't let them. Gunpowder units have significant problems at the moment in the game in terms of just being able to shoot. Sieging a minor settlement and siege battles are an absolute nightmare with a weapon team army. Does work very well if you're playing with the stealth units of Snitch. Does work very well if you're playing with the monstrous units of Fraught. Those do work well, but obviously they do have their own issues. Unless you're talking about Snitch. Snitch just dominates the map. I mean, he's got hidden units. But yeah, Skaven have one major problem, I feel, that does rank them down. Skaven really need to have entire provinces with a lot of settlements in them to have a good economy to support all their really good units. The issue is that if you're fighting in a contested territory, that can be a major issue. And if you're looking at provinces that only have a couple of settlements, then their economy is going to be significantly worse than pretty much anyone else except the ogres, I suppose, and demons of chaos. They're in an okay spot, but they do require some effort to get going. Once they get going, they're pretty good. But yeah, they do require some effort to do that. Speaking about races that require some effort to get going, the Tomb Kings. Yes, I'm going to put them as a B tier as well. The Tomb Kings, once you get to the end game, are something else. Like, you have an army of Shopties and Bone Giants and Necrosphinxes. Yeah, that's terrifying to face on the campaign map. It was spectacular for me when I was facing Scarbrand as Cetra, and I just killed him with a single Ushapti unit. A Regiment of Renown, really powerful unit, but it's like he never even came close to my lines. He never even was within shouting distance of my line like that. There's power, and then there's power. Just for reference, it would take many other armies, like an entire stack of range units to shoot at him to take him down as effectively as that one unit did. So the Tomb Kings have a lot of late game power, but they also start off in a really crappy situation because they can only recruit one army. They can only have one army at a time until you get research. The research takes 14 bloody turns, and it makes getting the third army much slower. The only guy who doesn't get affected by this is Archon the Black, who is by far and away the best legendary lord for the Tomb Kings. But yeah, if you're playing the Tomb Kings, you're going to have a very slow start. The thing is, the Tomb Kings only gain a lot of power if they maintain a lot of provinces and regions to get their unit recruitment up. Because they have limitations, like the Beastmen. However, the way they increase those limitations on units is by getting structures. Their structures are more expensive, though that's been nerfed in Immortal Empires. That's a lot more bearable. But yeah, they do have a very slow start. And as I've said again and again and again, having a good start really does matter in Immortal Empires. The Tomb Kings just have a slow start, unless you're Archon, who gets an extra army from the very beginning. Something that Cetra would need far more than Archon, because Archon is in a much better situation than Cetra is at the start. And I think actually the Tomb Kings overall would be significantly better if they got an extra army capacity from the very start of their campaigns. Once you do get things like Tomb Guards and a lot of unit capacity, Hakara Warriors, Chariots, Artillery, Screaming Skulls are terrifying to deal with on the campaign map. Once you get all of that going, they are something else. They are a powerhouse of a faction, but getting there is the problem. I would say they do have a substantial benefit in that losing an army doesn't feel that consequential. The only thing you're going to really lose is maybe the heroes attached to the army and the experience on the units you have, but you're not paying a gold cost for that. You can continuously lose battles and recover from that as the Tomb Kings. They are unstoppable. They are powerful, and they grow more and more powerful as you play them, but they do have severe limitations in their early game. The Vampire Counts, to talk about another undead race. The Vampire Counts, absolutely an A-tier faction. Especially with the rework that they've gotten in Immortal Empires. So in Immortal Empires, the Vampire Counts can maintain really powerful armies, and they can recruit them very easily without the structures, because they have the raised dead mechanic, which might even be cheaper than regular recruitment. So they get the same kind of recruitment benefit in a way that the Warriors of Chaos do, but is more powerful. Of course, Warriors of Chaos still end up top dog because of Dark Fortresses and Vassals, but Vampire Counts are probably the closest race to them. They and the Greenskins. Like, honestly, if I could change this list around, this could very well be an S tier in the minds of certain people. In fact, I put the Vampire Counts second only to the Greenskins, or on par with the Greenskins. What makes them so good is their ability to recruit a large number of units and recruit units cheaply. Helmut Gorst has gotten a lot of attention because he is able to just dominate the map. It's not that the zombies are unstoppable, it's that he can recruit them for very cheap. But all the Vampire Counts can recruit units for a very cheap cost. Maintain them for a very cheap cost. Zombies. We're in the era of the zombie doomstack. Gorst represents that in the best possible way, but all of them can benefit from that. And when you fight a major battle, you'll be able to recruit high-tier units or mid-tier units from said battle, and not just replenish your armies, but upgrade your armies from where they were. Graveguard, Hexraves, etc. Black Knights. You'll be able to get them from Raised Dead without any structures. And of course, there's research to improve this even further. They can get a lot of units very quickly. Like, they can get the full stack within like 2 turns, or the very first turn of your campaign, depending on the campaign you're talking about. But first turn, second turn, third turn, you're already talking about multiple stacks within the first 10 turns. Cost is going to be an issue, but they do have a pretty good economy. I would say if there's any particular problem with the vampire counts is that although they do start incredibly strong in all respects, army, economy, public order, their economy just doesn't have the same power over time as something like the Empire or Elves or Dark Elves has. It's more stagnant from that perspective, but it is still an incredibly powerful start, and there's nothing quite like recruiting an entire stack out of thin air with Raised Dead and just hurling that against the enemy. Then there are the Wood Elves. Where do the Wood Elves go? Well, I would certainly say B tier as a race. They have some of the best early game armies in the entire game. They don't get any specific recruitment benefits, but Glade Guard are flat out the best tier 1 units in the entire game. Absolutely. A range powerhouse of a unit that can take out any other tier 1 unit with relative ease. You stack these guys. You get improved versions if you get certain structures, but your tier 1 unit is like, yeah, they got some really powerful stuff. And it doesn't end there. That's just the beginning. That's not the ending. The Wood Elves have incredibly powerful monstrous units, cavalry units, flying units, melee units. Their monstrous units in particular, their tree spirits, are something unlike you're gonna see in any other campaign because they cause terror and fear. Treemen in particular cause terror and fear. Treekin cause fear. And they're heavily armored units as well. Like, many races have like 1 doom stack in the early game. The Wood Elves can get free doom stacks in the early game. Yeah, free. If you're playing the Sisters of Twilight specifically. If you're not playing the Sisters of Twilight, you only get 2. Only 2. One of those doom stacks is the Treekin spirit, Dryads, Treekin, Treemen, that Dryka and Durfu in particular can get easy access to. And they're so strong that there is genuinely no easy counter to that, because they're heavily armored units that, the Treekin in particular are heavily armored units that will terrorize your army. And there's no easy way for any faction to deal with that in the early game. You might get the most powerful early game armies in the entire game as the Wood Elves. Limited, of course, by our economy. This is why Warriors of Chaos end up top dog, because they get a lot of powerful units and have the economy to support that. The Wood Elves don't have quite the same benefit, but a Doomstack of Glade Guard is still going to be powerful. A Doomstack of Tree Spirits might be something very expensive, but if you get it, you're going to smash everything in your path. And it certainly fits the current mentality of sieges and minor settlements very well. And finally, we have the Vampire Coast. Where do I think they fit? And feel free to disagree with me on that. My experience with them is far more limited than with everyone else. But from my experience playing them, I would certainly say they're either a C or a B. They're okay. They have the Raised Dead, but it's not as powerful as the Vampire counts. They have the same benefits of Vampire Corruption. Corruption is very easy to get as the Vampires, by the way. Like, it's very easy to get Vampire Corruption, which was actually an issue that the Vampires used to face in Warhammer 1 in particular, and in Warhammer 2. That's been vastly improved right now. The problem is their economy is not the best, though you do get the ridiculous amount of gold from sacking even level 1 settlements. So you are really playing a race, a faction that's dedicated around traveling the world, sacking everything in its path. And if you're playing Count Noctilus in particular, you will start smack dab in the middle of the map. The actual middle of the map, that's where you're pretty much going to start. Well, not quite the literal middle, but very, very close to it. And you do have regular settlements, but you also have certain horde armies if you're playing the vampire counts. And so they have that benefit of horde armies and settlements. I would say their economy is not the best, and they do have one major downside that does prevent them from ranking higher than this list. They're a faction based on gunpowder units, and gunpowder units do incredibly poorly right now, especially in minor settlements and siege battles. That is the problem. If it was a lot of field battles on an open field, they would dominate the battlefields. They'd be top tier if the current meta was a lot of field battles. They'd be above the Warriors of Chaos, because getting a lot of gunpowder units from very early on would give them an advantage over virtually everyone else. But that's not what the vast majority of battles are. The vast majority of battles are minor settlement siege battles, and that is where they do struggle. You can make it work, don't get me wrong, they're not horrible, but they are going to face some limitations in that. They don't have the best growth, they have issues of loyalty, but you are playing a faction or race that's really going about an adventure, pirate hunting, all that. There's a lot of things to like, but there's just genuine problems right now with the implementation of gunpowder units in the game. And it's an issue all factions have when it comes to gunpowder units or Skaven weapon teams. It's an issue all of them have currently with gunpowder. Gunpowder units can do a lot of damage, but the getting the line aside the firing lanes is a nightmare at the moment. At least that's how I found it, and that certainly drags the Vampire Coast down. And that is it. I don't believe I've missed any particular race. I probably could talk about individual lords, but I'm going to do that in videos dedicated to those particular races like Empire and Skaven, as I've done already. But this is what I think currently. Warriors of Chaos the best, followed by all those at A, B, C, D, F tier. I'm sure a lot of Dwarves will be very angry at me, but yeah, Dwarves are kind of crap right now. Not so much in battles. They do have one of the best early game doom stacks, but economy, growth, public order, they're just in a bad space right now. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you next time.